I see people are signing in. That's great. Welcome. Welcome. We're right at 5 o'clock. And so
I just got a phone call.
A phone call?
From, Nathan just called the Skype.
Okay, well, I've sent a message and we'll see what happens. No. Just let's let Jeff take care of that. All right, so it is 5 o'clock and we have made some last minute adjustments here. So I think we are just about ready to get started. My name is Laura Terrell. It is my pleasure to be with you this afternoon and with our panelists. I work at the National Foreign Language Center at the University of Maryland, and I am going to invite our panelists to introduce themselves. And I want to tell those of you that are viewing that we will probably have one more panelist joining us in a few minutes. So we all know how that is with busy schedules and unusual schedules these days. Meiching, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Sure. My name is Meiching Chang. I'm a Chinese teacher in Glastonbury Public Schools, Connecticut.
Welcome. Lyanne?
Hi, I'm Lyanne Terada. I teach Spanish at Horizon High School in Thornton, Colorado.
Great. And Michelle?
Hi, good evening. I'm Michelle Kindt, and I teach French at Hershey High School in Hershey, Pennsylvania.
And I just can't help hearing Hershey, Pennsylvania without knowing that I must get there one of these days.
It's a great little
just in the nick of time, our fourth panelist, Nathan, could you just briefly introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Nathan Lutz, and I am an elementary school French teacher.
And I'm so looking forward to this conversation with all of you. We are going to be focusing our discussion this afternoon on planning. But if it is like our other panels, and if we get participation from the audience, we will have a wide variety of questions. The intent was to focus on the TEL domain, asking how do teachers plan learning experiences to prepare for student learning. As the broad overarching, we know that that's what we are being asked to do, to really think about learning. But we also did our best to look at the sessions that had been presented this afternoon and to think about what types of questions we could ask along those lines. And so I just want to say some things to our audience. If you have participated in another panel today or yesterday, this one is in a different format. There is a storm moving through the East Coast, which hit the University of Maryland with a power outage right before we were ready to go on. And so being teachers, we are just on plan B or C or D, whichever the case may be. We know that you are able to hear us through this webinar, and we are able to monitor the chat. So I will be doing my best to look at the chat, and I have someone helping me watch it. So if you have questions that you would like to submit to us, just please put them in the chat, which would be different from what you did previously. We know that we are probably not going to be able to get to all of your questions, but we will do our best to accommodate as many of them that we possibly can. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the question, are best practices in planning different in online instruction? And then what would cause you to say yes or no? And I know, Nathan, you had said that I could pick on you first. So let's hear that answer from an elementary perspective.
Sure. So I've heard a couple of different answers to this question, actually earlier today even. And one of them was, of course we wouldn't plan differently. It would be exactly the same because we have the same goals for our students. But I have to say, as you know, many of us did teach in a remote setting this last spring, it was a completely different paradigm for us to teach in. And I feel like there was the issue of the way students process information or directions was encumbered. I feel like we had to over-explain things. I felt like when we were having a synchronous class together online, that was even encumbered because there was just this slowness, that's all I can really think of somebody unmuting or somebody muting and somebody not hearing well and needing to have something repeated. So I feel like planning for that was really difficult in the beginning because I, of course, overplanned, as any good teacher does. And then finding that in subsequent sessions, I had to sort of really pare it down, really be judicious about the types of tasks that I asked my students to do and all the materials that I had prepared for them. And then sort of on the whole other side of planning, like if you've got a course management system or whatever method that you were pushing information out to your students, I just feel that, and you know, this probably goes for the middle and high school teachers as well, that just having everything as streamlined as possible for the students is so important. And one thing that we've drilled down on at my school here is we're gearing up for face-to-face instruction in the fall with the notion that we'll probably have to go remote at any time. But to really have whatever system that we set up, to have it be analogous between either face-to-face or at home. So the moment that we pivot, there won't be that whole growing pain of the transition, that we can seamlessly just shift from brick and mortar to virtual, and nobody's going to lose their, you know, wits about doing that.
Lyanne, did you have a few things you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I agree with Nathan that emergency remote learning was very challenging. However, I think the question referring to best practices, I would say, you know, for me, thinking about best practices, I think about the ACTFL core practices, and I think about how that really dictates and helps drive my instruction, because I do like to think about facilitating target language comprehensively. I like to guide learners through interpreting authentic resources, designing oral and interpersonal communication tasks, planning with the backward design model, teaching grammar as a concept and using that in context, and then providing appropriate oral feedback. I think these really help me as a world language educator decide what essential learnings I want to have. And I want to make sure that as I move into the brand new school year, that I do want to be using these high leverage teaching practices to facilitate that target language, you know, talk about that input to output, some of the things that we're going to be talking about today. And I think that's so important.
Others?
Yes, I think in the planning part, the feedback part is the most challenging part, you know, like, because we don't get to walk around, like, you know, like Rebecca was talking about, we don't get to walk around the room and listen to, you know, all they're talking about. So in synchronous class, we still, you know, like, unless you could open like a Zoom, like breakout Zooms, but you could only listen to one group at a time. And for asynchronous class, like, I don't see their reaction to it.
Right.
So I think it's important if it's like asynchronous class, that we should have the assignment for them to reflect. It doesn't have to be one format. It could be different format that they could show that that they reach the daily learning target. And then as teachers, we will have to review those. And the next day when they do the lesson, we have to review, oh, you guys did this really well. I'm so happy that you get it. Or I hear a little bit of this. Maybe I didn't explain it clear enough. Let me re-explain it. I really like, my students say that they really like the feedback because that tells them, did they do it right or did they do it wrong? Because they don't get to see me in person.
Okay. Michelle, did you have anything you wanted to add?
I just have one thing to add. When it comes to planning, I agree with Nathan that, you know, not much is going to change, because if you're planning well, you're still planning well for your classroom. However, I was given less time with my students than the rest of the earlier in the school year. So I had to make some big decisions about what I was going to teach. There was no way I could cram everything I was planning to teach into the last part of the school year. So really asking what are the essential pieces that my students need in order for them to, several things, be engaged, to have maybe the tools that they need so that they're ready for the next level, and really just really streamline the ideas and the things that I had. So even though the planning was the same, the content did change.
Mhm.
And I think that that's something that we all really need to look at when it comes to more online teaching. I hope not. But I think that there is the potential that the making choices about what we're going to have students do, rather than just try to do everything in a remote way. I think that's my only addition to that.
I just want to chime in with one thing from our university panelists, our students this afternoon. They were talking when you referred to, I think it was you, Meiching, that referred to the Zoom rooms. They actually said they felt that it kept them more accountable and more on track because one, they were put into random rooms and they didn't always work with their friends. And two, they had no idea when the teacher was going to pop in. And then I laughed because the next comment was, because when we're in the classroom, we can see the teacher starting to walk over and we know to switch to what we're supposed to be doing. And I just felt that if university students were commenting that way, just work that back down to high school and middle school. So I think we're all in this together. This planning is different, but it's still the same in so many ways. Let me go ahead and go to that question about learning experiences. How did you feel about the planning that would move students from input, what they would do in the interpretive mode, and then to the output mode? And I know from other panels and conversations, it's really that interpersonal mode that many of our participants are asking about. So input to output. Meiching, I think you said you wanted to try to take this question.
I think that tightly connect to the planning part, because in order to lead the student from input to output, we will have to have a thoroughly planned curriculum, from our the courses proficiency targets to our units, like the performance objectives into the daily learning targets. So I think mostly in the daily learning target, when we are planning it, the activity that we do, the first one is going to lead to the second one, just like our lessons. The first one is the I+1, it's going to lead to the next one, continue from this one, and then it's going to bring them up a little bit to another I+1, that where they are. And like in this one, and then I always had to remind myself, it's like how my son learned to speak. It took him months before he could say the first word. And I can't remember how many times I said mama to him before he could say mama. So I feel like at least I try to remind myself to remember this, is that our kids won't remember what we said one time. We think, I taught you, you should be able to, and then I also, we need to show them what we want them to learn in different contexts, in different situations, for them to internalize what we want to teach them. And also, we have to scaffold it, gradually bring them to what we want them to do, no matter if it's for daily learning targets or the unit performance. It like each time we unveil some part for them to challenge them, and then once they get it, we move on to the next part to bring them to that objective. And I think anything you want them to make an output, it had to be practiced. We taught them, and then we need to practice it in class, in pairs, in groups, and in person, like individual practice, before we want the kids to be able to do the output independently.
Okay. Is there someone that would like to tag on that? Just nod your head.
I'll hop
jump
in.
Please.
So in our elementary school, we had some challenges of how much screen time we wanted to have our students do. And, world languages is often relegated to number 5 on, the pecking order of who gets, time and such. So for our youngest learners, we only did asynchronous teaching when we were in quarantine teaching, which was extremely challenging to get them to do any sort of output that we could get. We eventually adopted a platform called Seesaw, which is a great child-friendly tool where they were able to make recordings of themselves. Our classroom teachers were making heavy use of Flipgrid, just answering prompts in response to books that they were reading or social studies topics. And so we in World Languages use that to simulate interpersonal communication with the students. Fortunately, with our older students, third grade and up, we were able to do a blend of synchronous and asynchronous. And so it was a little bit easier to, have that output with them, but it was definitely a challenge. I'll admit that.
Yeah, I also
Anybody
add
else?
that I had a chance to actually watch, Laura, your session about, I guess it was session 18, planning for learning, less is more. And I really felt like you brought a lot of important things that when I plan learning experiences to move my learners from input to output, I really try to think about the why before the how, like you mentioned, and I try to think about something engaging. What is my topic? What do I really want to get out? What do I want to move them toward? What are my evidence outcomes? But at the same time, I also want to be looking at the essential questions that could really drive that critical thinking piece and the inquiry. And I really liked your point about curriculum as a mirror and as a window, and really I'm encouraging people to watch that. But Rebecca Bluewolf also had her session 37 called Learning Progressions for the New Now. And I found that also very informative to talk about input to output. And she did mention examples from synchronous and asynchronous, input to output, and then interpretive and interpersonal. And I felt like some of the examples that you gave in your video and some of the examples that she gave in her video were so helpful, to really see it, in place, and I encourage people to make sure that they watch those.
Well, I have watched all 70 sessions prior to the start, so I can assure you all that there is a ton of good content out there. Michelle, did you have something you wanted to add from that high school perspective also?
Sure. I think if we're definitely speaking in terms of the use of a synchronous class using online tools, when I use Zoom with my students, one of the things that I found with the output, because for whatever reason, the reasons mentioned before, where it's hard to control the classroom in the sense where you're like facilitating a conversation in the same way, can't use your body, you can't use your proximity, you can't use these things, and certain students always enjoy doing most of the talking. I opened up the chat feature and I said to my students, if you would like to respond and you don't want to do it out loud, put your answer in the chat, send to me privately if you don't want everyone else to see it. And I will use your input, so to speak, to create more input for the class and to really make sure that ideas and thoughts are continuing in the conversation. I teach mostly upper level students, so I was able to do that, but it was one way that they were producing and giving me output in their writing, and I was using that to encourage more input among the students. So that was just a little trick that I did with that, but really ultimately output's in the hands of the learner. And they're the ones that decide what they're going to say, when they're going to say it, how they're going to say it, particularly if it's spontaneous and authentic. So, just really providing great experiences for them where they feel comfortable and they're willing to take risks and really enjoy what's happening in the classroom, so they want to contribute.
Michelle, you've just alluded to a question that's come up in the chat a little bit. So I'm going to just segue into that and just try to see if any of you have a little bit more, because you just mentioned the word stress. And the question that we've gotten is really, how did you cope if students were under stress? Did you have moments like that? Because the question says it's not going to be easy to send them to the counselor to deal with those types of issues, but did you have moments of high stress, and did you find a way to connect individually with that learner? Because I think we are all sensitive to the fact that our learners are under new stresses, even if they were under stress before.
I think for me, the only thing that I did regularly was I would ask, is there anything else I can do to make this more manageable for you? Is there something, the way that we're running class, that could be more efficient or more, that could just help you feel better about the process? I just tried to be there for them. I would maybe give them a couple minutes of just like, yeah, this really stinks. We really hate it, but okay, here we go, and jump back in. But, giving them that chance to know that I cared. The day that we found out we weren't going back to school, I was in a class when one of the kids found out, and they were just like, we just found out, and they started crying, and that was high stress. And I just cried with them, and I said, this isn't what any of us wanted. But I think going into it in the fall, if we do have online teaching, remote teaching, I think the kids are going to be maybe more, I'm hoping maybe more used to it, maybe have at least recognize that it's coming. It's not going to be a shock to their system. But I think just being sensitive to students' needs, and really the learner is more important than the content. And we always need to remember that, putting them first.
Are there others that want to chime in or had something that they can offer to our audience?
Sure, I could. One of the feedback my student gave me is that I always, even online lessons, I keep a routine, just like my class. So they say they know what to expect. Like they know I will have an opening. They know I will do the new lessons first, and I will review my new lesson follows yesterday's, right? And then I will do an activity with them, and then at the end, they all know they have to produce something. So they feel like that they have a little bit control because they know what to expect. They know what they will have to do. And then the assignments are all different, they know. So I think that reduced their anxiety a little bit. And they all know that the lesson length is all about a similar times, So I think to keep it, even for online lesson, to keep a routine is as important as just how we do it in person.
Kind of back to our original question, is online planning different than in-person planning? But keeping that routine is certainly something we know is best practice. Nathan or Lyanne, you have anything that?
I would say keeping that, keeping your door open and being approachable and providing opportunities for students to connect with you. I in my live Zoom classes that I had with students, I would often get private messages just like, I miss school, I miss you. And it just like broke my heart to read those messages from 9-year-olds who were just craving normalcy once again.
Right.
Simple things like having office hours available for students to pop in, just to ask questions, or just to like say hi to you, because it's just, they just need that outlet. And we're talking about ways of building community when we return to this again. So whether it's like have snack with Mr. Lutz, or have lunch with Senora Greg, or, just some, it's a natural break that they're already going to have in their day, but to have it sort of facilitated with an adult that they know, I think it's going to be really, really helpful. And the way that I was justifying that with a colleague was that, we can get that sort of, not that I want to say get that out of the way, that soft skills stuff out of our class, but like when we're in class for those 20 minutes that were allotted, we can get down to business, because we had all of the,
because we had some of the chit chat and the fun stuff in other venues.
Exactly,
and
during lunch.
Responding to something someone just said in chat, doing it in small groups and not one-on-one, so that we still, just like in a classroom, right? We can't be one-on-one with students as easily as we used to be able to. Well, let me move us on, because I know that, of course, this year we're thinking about the social emotional learning of our students. We always should have, but maybe even more this year. So I was happy that we could segue into that. But I do want to ask this question about culture. How do we plan to bring culture into our classroom in very intentional ways, so that we're really developing this concept of interculturality? And I just invite any of you to chime in, but I think, Lyanne, you wanted to know, maybe it was Nathan that was going to take this, or Lyanne, I forget. Michelle, thank you very much. It is the end of a long day.
That's okay. I think we all have a lot to say about this, but I'll try to be brief. I'm going to be kind of general because I feel like the goal of adding culture, everything we do is culture. Everything we do in our own classroom, in our own setting, we all have culture and we all have differences. So as soon as we can, and I love that this is part of my job as a language teacher, that as soon as we can, we need to be opening up those communications with students about, oh, that's so neat what you do. Oh, this is what I do. And even if it's just on a real personal level among families, just knowing that, oh, that's unique. I like that about your family. This is what we do. As we begin to open that up now about other cultures, other places, we're going to talk about some of those similar things like food or clothing or whatever, but just the idea that differences are good, and why is such an important part of that question. And I think anything that we do in the classroom has it's sending a cultural message, and our opinion about that is sending it. So it's really important that we learn how to just talk to students about that and have that generally there. Now, the next part of that is planning intentionally for these really great conversations or topics that you want to have. There is so much great stuff out there, films, music, current events, all sorts of great things that you can latch onto that help you to just continue that message of how just because we're different. In fact, the beauty is in the comparison, and that, yeah, this is so unique to you, but yet also this is how we do it. I think it's really great. I think just saying, oh, well, this is how France handles this situation, and not having the comparison part, and not discussing that, recognizing that everybody's choices, everybody's decisions, every culture's way is unique. I think we have to have that discussion. It's not just about, this is what France eats for breakfast. Why? Let's dig down at that cultural iceberg. I don't know if you've ever heard of that idea, but we see this little bit, this tip, but there's so much more under the surface, and the why question gets us there. So my answer was a little generic in that, but I do want to reiterate how important it is that we start that acceptance of other cultures by accepting each other in the classroom.
I think that's beautifully put. Others that want to chime in, because I know you all have a lot to say about this. I mean, this is our passion, right? Bringing this interculturality into our classrooms. Lyanne, why don't you take it? You did a session on it.
I actually have a session that I was exploring myself professionally, and I like to hold myself accountable to submit a proposal in areas that I am exploring to kind of push my own learning and to have really accountability in that area. And I mentioned in that session the shift of how I used to teach world languages to how I'm trying to teach world language. And I feel like it's I've done cultural things and incorporate music and videos. And I really like how Michelle says it's really what we do. I mean, it really, like, I feel like it's part of who we are as educators, and this is what we do. But I also feel like the shift for me is taking culture as being fixed and solid to being more fluid and transformative. Are people changing how they're thinking, and are they treating people differently, because of that? And instead of just focusing on specific holidays or specific, practices within that culture, I've been trying to integrate culture, more intentionally, so that I can, incorporate that in thematic units with the essential questions.
Could you give us an example of that? I know you've got several in your session, so you can tease us.
So I was trying to see how I could just move. Really, I have this idea of this cultural wheel that really came from some of my graduate classes, but it's trying to look at perspectives and integrating the cultures of my own students, so that it would bring within like a percentage for areas of focus. So if your heritage is important to you, that could be part of it. If your family is important to you, and then you could have it in a percentage, and then the students, you would see my model, and then they would be able to compare their different wheels with each other, recognizing how different and similar they could be. And what I really like about it is that there's a range of novice through intermediate, that's the levels that I tend to teach, that they can really access doing this in the language and having the conversations about that. So instead of just having, you know, us talk about Day of the Dead, you know, we can talk about it in a broader way in terms of, you know, talking about hunger, you know, and then, you know, beyond the cultural wheel, but then looking at other places and how, you know, food is of value to different cultures in different ways, and how they then produce it, how they then, you know, we talk about meals and different ways to integrate it. So sorry, I'm trying to answer in my head. I was talking
I think that's
about the cultural
great.
wheels, but in terms of thematic units, you know, that's one that I really like to do with the
So
hungry.
it sounds like what you're saying is that all of your units, really culture is a driving force in them.
Well, I'm trying to really make it intentional, but I do, yeah, as Michelle was saying.
That's great.
Yeah.
Meiching or Nathan?
Other than, you know, teachers who will represent the cultures, I also like to, in Glastonbury, we have the luxury of having exchange trip. We have sister schools in the target language countries.
Nice.
So I collaborate projects with our sister school in China, because they're all high school kids. So it's easier for the kids to communicate with each other and to see the differences that they have, you know, with the class schedules, with how they celebrate holidays. And then, so that is to bring the culture, you know, like it's authentic. It's how those students do those things. It's better than I try to tell them, this is how we celebrate a holiday. This is what our school day is like. So I feel like that really helps that part to, and have the students from two sides to discuss about it.
And for our elementary learners, I think it's culture is just such a vibrant, beautiful thing for them to witness, but it's also a time in their development when they need to sort of break down those ideas of stereotypes and really to understand the complexity of a culture. And as a French teacher, I love showing the whole French diaspora and looking beyond France, but into the Caribbean and Africa and various places in North America where French is spoken. But it's important, you know, when we're looking at Senegal, not to show somebody in just native dress, but also modern dress that people in the business world might be wearing, where it looks very similar to what our business people here in the United States look like, and to really, you know, at a very simple level, to show that there is difference, but also a lot of similarity as well, and to sort of dispel those notions of stereotypes that young learners will often glom onto.
One of the sessions picks up on that idea of the stereotypes, where if you show one picture of a school, you better be showing 3 or 4 others to pick up the diversity that we see in our own country between schools that are poor and schools that are rich, and small and large. And because we can't risk stereotyping by what we choose to bring in. I think that's a really powerful message about how we use our videos, how we use our images. So, well, thank you for your thinking on culture. I think we'll go ahead and go on to planning for the diversity of our students. Seems to be a natural segue from the notion of interculturality. And you alluded to it when you said we need to draw in the cultures of our own students within the classroom. We don't want to make them the representative of their culture in a token way, but we want them to be able to bring their culture in. But on the planning side, how do we work on that question of diversity? How do we plan for diversity? And have you seen a difference between that in online versus classroom instruction, and thinking that through? Nathan, do you mind taking that? You lean forward, and that's all it takes. When somebody leans in or nods their head, that means they're on.
No. You know, that's, you know, obviously with, you know, the activity that has gone on this early part of the summer, there's a, you know, huge national shift toward being more mindful about how we, address our diverse student bodies. And it's been a topic of conversation at my school for many years, and it's something we're definitely drilling down on this summer. But we, as an institution, developed a document that we affectionately call the MESA, which stands for Multicultural Education Self-Assessment. And it's a tool that all teachers are expected to engage with as they are examining their culture, or examining their curriculum, and also their classroom practices, whether it's, imagery that they use in the classroom or certain habits that they use when, interacting with students or teaching. And I find for my planning, it's such a valuable document because it, like the TEL document, that it's a self-assessment that you can sit down and really reflect on what you do as an educator. And it pushes you to do better in areas where you may feel that you are not as as efficient or as proficient. And we are expected, when we move into whatever hybrid looks like for us this fall, or at whatever point we transition over to virtual again, to keep these practices in mind, and to be mindful of our pedagogical practices and the curriculum that we're bringing forth to the students.
Others?
This is such a broad question, and we have so many types of learners. I did want to specifically focus in on some heritage learners, just because Marta Silva, some of the videos that we previewed for this panel had really such great information in her Meet in the Middle, Connect World Language Educators and Heritage Language Students. And I really felt her message about sometimes when we don't find out the story and the narrative of our learners, and these heritage learners are really a gift to the world language classroom. And as a Spanish teacher, I think more so than in many other communities, but the heritage learner really is such a unique, bring such unique qualities with their multiple languages and cultures. And there is, it's so important what Marta was talking about with the prestige and the standard use of language. And I think it's really valuable for us as educators to continue to validate their language, what language they bring into the classroom along with their culture, because that language shaming really is kind of like an identity and culture shaming. And it's really moving beyond that so that they feel, moving away from not feeling like they belong in either culture to having a place and feeling proud of their heritage and really being able to move forward and addressing skills that stereotypically you may view certain heritage learners as not having the reading skills or not having the literacy skills, which may or may not be true. So it's really just to be able to focus as a Spanish teacher on our heritage learners. I feel like it's a unique group and there are a lot of resources out there, but I just wanted to mention how, embracing the evolution of language, and the words that are being used in the community is just so important. And I love it, that they can bring their prior knowledge into the classroom to share, what their family does, how they have been celebrating certain things, at different points and being class resources.
Powerful. Michelle or Meiching, would you like to chime in?
Sure. I think one of the ways that to help the students with different background or different levels is to give them choices. It's not one assignment fits all. Like the tier part, you could have different tiers. And according to students' ability and their comfort level, if we could provide them different levels of choices, that usually also enhance their learning.
Or as our keynote speaker this afternoon said, really let them have a role to play in selecting what they want to do and shaping what they want to do. Michelle?
The other thing I would add is that there's also the diversity of how students learn, that oftentimes world language is considered more of an elite type subject that only certain students can can achieve or can take. And I would like to break down that stereotype and really encourage that all students can learn a second language, and that we are advocating for that for our students in their classrooms, and looking to the student that would be potentially considered the least likely that would want to take a language, but that child is the one that needs the language. And we have a long way to go in this, I think, in our profession, but I do think that a lot is happening in our world, and we have to come up with ways to make this accessible to students, to all kinds of students. And it's growing and it's getting better, but like Lyanne was saying and talking about her professional growth, these are things that I've been learning too. My professional growth is, how can I keep a student taking this language the longest possible? So making it accessible to the students who aren't great at some of the things that are traditionally been expected of them, like grammar or memorizing, or things that maybe are just not in their nature. How do we make the language accessible to them? How do we keep them involved in learning a language as long as possible, because of these beautiful messages of interculturality that we want to keep relaying to our students and opening the world to them?
So we're coming to the end, but I'm so glad you brought up Marta's session, because I have a quote here that it's just been resonating with me. She said at some point in her presentation, and I know she was talking about heritage students, she said, some teachers put on an eye mask and ignore the needs of students who are walking a different path. And when we do that, we are blindfolding ourselves. And I think that while she applied it to heritage, it certainly applies to all learners, like you were just talking about, Michelle. I want to put you all on the spot, because that's what you do, you know. So if you could create your own personal mantra about planning in 5 words or less, what would you say? I mean, what will you be reminding yourself of as this unusual year comes to a start? And obviously it's easier to go first so that somebody doesn't steal yours and you have to be thinking, but you don't have to respond. But if anyone really thought about that and you were just trying to distill it to just a couple of words, what are you keeping in mind? Because this is, maybe it's too hard. Planning, it's like huge.
I'm going to steal your idea that less is more. I'm sorry, Michelle.
No, go right ahead.
Less is more.
Less
Okay?
is more.
That's a mantra, and it's okay to say that. It's okay to say less is more. Michelle, you were ready.
I think I would say, teach what you're passionate about.
Teach for passion.
Teach for passion, because the kids will be excited about what you're excited about.
Mm-hmm. Teachers and learners. Nathan?
Lyanne? Slow down, take your time.
Slow down, take your time. We always try to do too much too fast and it backfires on us. Lyanne, you get the last word.
I think students first, then some Spanish. I really was moved by Katrina Griffin's live message earlier today, and seeing our students as humans and how we value them so much more than our content area. Of course, I love Spanish. I'm passionate about Spanish, but really having the students know how much I love them and I care about them, and they're really more important.
I think it's really important. I had a professor once in a graduate class who said, "What do you do?" And everybody was wanting to answer, "I teach French." And he would make us stop and say, "I teach students French." And he did that to us every class until we knew we were supposed to say that. So, well, I am going to say thank you to all of you. Thank you for being a very alert panel at what is a late time of day for some of us, and also for your flexibility in going to plan A, B, C, or D, whatever plan we were on. And I do want to tell those of you that were engaged, I think there were over 100, if you did have questions that weren't answered, there are the Google Sheets that go with each of the presentations that we referenced, and you could go back into those Google Docs, put your questions in, and you will get some input from either the presenter or another participant. And we hope that you will tweet out using our NFLC Virtual Summit hashtag what your big learnings were today. And we hope that you have a great day tomorrow at this virtual summit. So kudos to all of you, and thank you for your participation. Goodbye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.